My name is Margaret. I'm 70 years old, and after 4 decades of running a financial consulting firm, I thought the hardest battles of my life were behind me. That evening was supposed to be a celebration, my farewell to the long grind of work and the beginning of quiet days filled with reading, gardening, and perhaps spoiling my granddaughter. The restaurant glowed with golden light, laughter bounced off the walls, and glasses of champagne sparkled like liquid fire. Friends, old colleagues, and family gathered around a long table dressed in white linen. I should have felt at peace. Instead, an unease coiled inside me like a cold snake. I noticed it in the smallest of details. My daughter-in-law, Lydia, leaned too close to my glass, her hand brushing against the rim just a second too long. When she straightened up, her smile was stretched tight, a little too practiced, like a mask that didn't quite fit. My son's Daniel didn't look at me when he laughed, though he always had his father's easy grin. His eyes darted to Lydia, then down to the table. That flicker of avoidance struck me harder than the champagne bubbles ever could. Something wasn't right. I glanced at the glass in front of me. It was mine. I knew it well. The crystal with a small chip at the base of the stem, a mark from years back when a careless waiter had dropped it, and I had insisted on keeping it. No one else would notice the flaw, but I always did. I raised it to the light and saw nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the memory of Lydia's hand. A faint scent drifted upward, bitter, almost medicinal, hidden beneath the fizz. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid the others would hear. In that instant, my mind worked faster than it had in years of board meetings and negotiations. I shifted slightly in my chair, pretending to adjust my napkin, and slid my glass toward Patricia, Lydia's mother, when she reached out for a refill. Nobody noticed the switch. The band began playing softly. Forks clinked against plates, and Patricia raised the glass high in a cheerful toast. The moment her lips touched the rim, time slowed. I watched her throat work as she swallowed, her smile freezing into shock. Then came the choking cough, the desperate gasp, the glass shattering against the floor as she crumpled in her chair. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests rose in panic, calling for help, voices blurring together in a frantic storm. Lydia shrieked Patricia's name, while Daniel's face drained of color. I sat frozen, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. The terrible truth struck me like ice water. The poison had never been meant for Patricia. It had been meant for me. The restaurant descended into chaos. Waiters rushed forward, one of them calling out for an ambulance, while guests clustered in small, panicked knots. My old colleagues looked horrified, their faces pale under the crystal lights. The sound of Patricia's wheezing filled the air, high and desperate, until it broke into silence as she slumped against her chair. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the back of my seat. My knees ached with the stiffness of age, but my mind was sharp, racing. Lydia clutched Patricia's shoulders, shaking her as if that could rattle the life back in. Her wails were piercing, but behind them I heard something else. Fear. Yes, but not the raw fear of losing a loved one. It was thinner, sharper, the fear of being found out. Daniel finally moved, fumbling with his phone to dial 911, his fingers slipping on the screen. I watched him. My son, the boy who once begged me to let him stay up late to watch baseball games, now trembling like a guilty child. My heart twisted, torn between the instinct to comfort him and the dreadful suspicion clawing at my chest. I knelt beside Patricia, ignoring Lydia's flailing cries. Her lips had turned a strange shade, her breath shallow. My hand hovered above her, But I did not touch. I was careful. Careful not to give anyone reason to twist this night into something that would place the blame on me. I had lived long enough to know how quickly people turned on the vulnerable. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the evening air outside. They lifted Patricia onto a stretcher, masks and tubes covering her face. Lydia stumbled beside them, clutching her mother's limp hand. Daniel trailed behind, his eyes darting toward me, but never quite meeting mine. I stood in the doorway of the restaurant, the cool night air brushing against my cheeks, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to fear. Not fear of dying. I had long made peace with my own mortality, but fear of betrayal. The betrayal that comes from blood, from family, the kind that cuts deeper than any stranger's knife. The guests whispered among themselves, some offering me concerned glances, others clearly eager to escape the shadow that had fallen over the celebration. My retirement party was over. The night that was supposed to mark the beginning of my rest had opened instead with suspicion, poison, and a secret that now clung to the air like smoke. As I stepped back inside, I felt the weight of every eye on me. They saw a woman whose celebration had turned into a nightmare. But I knew the truth. This was no accident. Patricia had drunk from my glass. Someone had meant to silence me. And I intended to find out who and why before they tried again. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, a scent I had come to associate with endings. I sat in the waiting area, my coat folded neatly on my lap, while Lydia paced in tight circles. Daniel slouched in a chair across from me, his elbows on his knees, his eyes glued to the floor. The doctors were with Patricia, and the silence between us was heavier than any diagnosis. I kept my gaze on Lydia. She was wringing her hands, whispering to herself, her mascara smudging in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked every bit the devastated daughter, but I couldn't forget that fleeting moment at the table, her fingers on my glass, her sharp glance at Daniel before Patricia collapsed. That memory sat in my chest like a stone. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave but calm. He explained that Patricia had suffered acute poisoning, though she was stable for now, under observation. Lydia sobbed into Daniel's shoulder, clinging to him as if the announcement shattered her. Daniel rubbed her back, whispering reassurances, but his eyes flickered toward me just once, and in that brief glance, I saw guilt swimming in his pupils. It was gone as quickly as it came, but I had built my career on recognizing patterns others overlooked. Acute poisoning, I repeated softly, almost to myself. The doctor nodded, promising more tests. Lydia's wails rose again, high and shrill. I excused myself and stepped out into the cool corridor. My hands shook as I reached into my purse, not for a tissue, but for the small notebook I always carried. I had used it for years to jot down financial leads, client notes, strategies. Now I opened it to a clean page and wrote one word: motive. That night, alone in my house, I pulled out files Daniel had left behind when he visited last month. Credit card bills, loan reminders, unopened envelopes stacked carelessly. I unfolded them one by one, the numbers climbing higher, the late fees mounting. My son was drowning in debt, gambling, extravagance, or simply the weight of a life lived beyond his means. Whatever the cause, the desperation was clear. The pieces began to fit together in a pattern that made my stomach turn. Lydia and Daniel had both stood to gain if I were gone. I had life insurance policies, savings, property, assets that could clear debts and fund their lifestyles for years. And Lydia, clever Lydia, had always spoken sweetly about planning for the future. Words I once thought were considerate, but now felt like sharpened knives wrapped in silk. I closed the file, my hands steady now. Fear had given way to something colder, sharper. Suspicion had become certainty. Someone I loved had tried to end me, and the night's chaos was only the beginning. As I turned off the light and the house sank into silence, I promised myself one thing. I would not be their victim. I would uncover every detail, every lie, until the truth stood naked in daylight. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, but it brought no comfort. My house, usually a sanctuary filled with familiar creaks and the scent of coffee, felt like a stage where danger lurked in every shadow. I made myself a cup anyway, strong and black, and sat at the kitchen table with the bills I had unearthed the night before. The numbers stared back at me like accusations, reminding me that my son and his wife were drowning, and they had looked at me as their lifeline. I picked up the phone and called Richard Collins, my attorney for more than 30 years. Richard was a man I trusted. He had handled my firm's contracts, my husband's estate, and countless details of my financial life. When he answered, his voice carried the same steady calm I remembered. "Margaret," he said, "you don't usually call this early. What's happened?" I hesitated only a moment before telling him everything. Not the poison, not yet, but the debts, the behavior, the uneasy feeling that something more sinister was stirring beneath the surface. Richard listened without interruption. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You need to protect yourself," he said firmly. "First, let's get an independent medical evaluation confirming your mental capacity. That way, if anyone tries to claim you're unfit to manage your affairs, they'll fail. Second, update your will and establish a trust that locks down your assets beyond anyone's easy reach." The words steadied me. This was a battlefield I understood. Paperwork, contracts, signatures, shields as strong as steel if used correctly. We arranged a meeting for that afternoon, at his office. I sat across from Richard in the leather chair that had molded to the shape of countless clients before me. He slid documents across the desk, and I signed with deliberate strokes, each letter of my name a vow. A new trust, tighter and more secure, ensuring that my assets could not be seized through manipulation. My revised will, clear and precise, leaving no loopholes. "Margaret," Richard said as he notarized the pages, "you've always been 10 steps ahead. Stay that way now." When I returned home, I called a security company and arranged for discreet cameras throughout the house, hallways, entrances, even the kitchen where I kept my medicine and food. If Lydia or Daniel tried anything under my roof, I would have the proof. The technician arrived the same day, his tools clicking softly as he installed the small black eyes that now watched silently from the corners. That evening, as the cameras blinked their first lights, I sat in my living room with a strange mix of grief and resolve. Grief that I had to guard myself from my own family, and resolve that I would not be cornered. My life's work had been building security for others. Now, it was time to build it for myself. And beneath that resolve, a spark of anger glowed brighter with every passing hour. A week later, the knock on my door came earlier than I expected. Daniel stood there, shoulders hunched, Lydia close beside him. They carried the nervous brightness of people rehearsing lines, their smiles stretched too wide. I let them in, watching carefully as they crossed the threshold. Lydia glanced around the living room, her eyes brushing over the faint red glow of the security camera in the corner. She didn't linger on it, but I saw the flicker of awareness in her gaze. "Mom," Daniel began, clearing his throat, "we've been talking. We think it's time you considered a safer living arrangement." "Safer?" I asked, folding my arms. "Yes. Lydia chimed in quickly. Sunset Haven. It's a wonderful retirement community. Very secure, with 24-hour care. We toured it last week. You'd love the gardens. I almost laughed. Gardens? I had my own. But I kept my face calm. Curious. And what exactly makes you think I need 24-hour care? Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Lydia. We worry, Mom. After what happened to Patricia, we don't want anything bad to happen to you. Patricia? The name twisted in my chest. She was still in the hospital, recovering slowly. Lydia's performance of concern for me rang hollow. Her hand slid into her purse, and she pulled out a neat stack of papers. It's standard, she said smoothly. Power of attorney. This way, if anything happens, Daniel can manage things for you. Bills, healthcare decisions, all of it. It's really just a precaution. I took the papers, flipping through them as if I were simply curious. The legal jargon was familiar. I had signed enough contracts in my lifetime to know what I was reading. This was no simple precaution. It was complete control. Financial, medical, personal. Every decision transferred into Daniel's hands, with Lydia no doubt pulling the strings. I looked up at my son. He avoided my eyes again. Once, when he was a boy, he had stared at me with such openness. Now he looked like a man hiding behind shadows. I appreciate your concern, I said slowly, keeping my voice soft. But this is a lot to take in. I'll need time to review it properly. Lydia pressed forward. We've already spoken to Dr. Monroe, a specialist in geriatrics. He said he could do a quick evaluation, just to confirm you're still capable. It's nothing serious. The word stung, but I kept my composure. Capable, I repeated, as if testing the taste of it. Yes, Lydia said with a too sweet smile. It's just a formality. Better to have everything in order. I set the papers down on the coffee table and folded my hands. Of course, I said, my tone calm, even warm. I'll think about it. Inside, my anger burned cold. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I was already frail enough to sign my life away, but they were wrong. 2 days later, I sat across from Evelyn Hart in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. She was sharp-eyed, with a no-nonsense air that reminded me of women I once hired to audit my firm's toughest accounts. Her reputation was solid, private investigator, discreet, and thorough. I need the truth, I told her plainly, about my son and his wife. Discretion is non-negotiable. Evelyn nodded, sliding a small recorder into her bag. You'll have it, but the truth can be ugly. Margaret, are you sure you want to see it? I already see enough to know it's there, I replied. My voice was steady, but my chest tightened. Hiring someone to investigate your own child was not something a mother ever imagined she'd do. Yet here I was, forced into it by the bitter taste of betrayal. She worked quickly. Within a week, Evelyn handed me a thick envelope filled with photographs, printouts, and transcripts. I carried it home like a weight pressing against my ribs. At my kitchen table, under the watchful glow of the security cameras, I opened it. The first shock came in the form of an insurance policy, a life insurance policy. My name listed as the insured, but the beneficiary wasn't Daniel. It was Lydia, $500,000, signed only 6 months ago. I pressed my palm against the paper, my breath shallow. It was one thing to suspect greed. It was another to see it documented in black and white. Next came the bank records, transfers, withdrawals, and overdue notices. Daniel's debts ran deeper than I'd realized. Gambling tables in Atlantic City, Credit cards maxed out, personal loans spiraling. The picture was clear. Desperation had taken root, and Lydia had fanned it into something darker. But it was the messages that sealed it. Text exchanges between the two of them, pulled from Lydia's phone, words that made my stomach twist. "We can't keep waiting," Lydia had typed. "Once she's in Sunset Haven, it'll be easier," Daniel replied. "Monroe says he can sign off. We just need her to slip up." "Patricia messed things up. We need to move faster." Patricia, even her own mother, had been nothing more than collateral damage. My hand trembled as I set the papers down. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the walls of my home. The cameras blinked silently, recording the empty room. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry, not out of weakness, but out of grief for the son I thought I knew. I cried for the years of trust, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees I had kissed, all of it now tangled in lies and betrayal. When the tears dried, what remained was resolve. They had turned this into a war for control. But wars are not won by those who underestimate their opponent. And if they thought my age made me vulnerable, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The knock on my door that evening was not gentle. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, their cruiser's lights painting the driveway in flashes of red and blue. My heart thudded once, hard, before settling into the calm rhythm I knew from years of crisis management. "Mrs. Whitfield?" one of them asked. "Yes. I'm Detective Harris. This is Officer Green. We'd like to speak with you about the champagne bottle from your retirement party." I stepped aside, letting them in. The living room was quiet, the cameras blinking softly in the corners. I gestured for them to sit, but Harris remained standing, a folder tucked under his arm. "We received the toxicology report," he said. "The contents of that bottle tested positive for oleander, a highly toxic compound. Whoever ingested it could have died without immediate medical care." I let the words hang in the air, though I had expected them. Harris studied me, waiting for a reaction. I gave him none. "We also spoke with hospital staff," he continued. "Your daughter-in-law Lydia behaved suspiciously when Patricia was admitted. Combined with other evidence, we have enough to take her in for questioning." At that moment, the front door opened. Daniel and Lydia stepped inside, their laughter cut short by the sight of the officers. Lydia froze, her face draining of color. Daniel looked from me to the detectives, confusion unraveling across his features. "Lydia Whitfield," Harris said sharply, "you're under arrest for attempted homicide." The words cracked through the air like thunder. Lydia's mouth opened, a scream tearing free as Harris moved forward, cuffing her wrists. She thrashed, eyes wild, spitting words at Daniel. "Do something! Stop them!" But Daniel only stood there, his face slack, his hands useless at his sides. I rose slowly, a folded document already waiting on the table. "Daniel," I said quietly. His head snapped toward me. I slid the paper across the polished wood surface. "This is the power of attorney you signed last week." He frowned then snatched it up, his eyes scanning the lines. I watched the moment of realization strike him like a hammer. His face crumpled. "You gave me control over $1? His voice cracked, high and broken. "Yes," I said calmly. "You signed it without reading, because you trusted Lydia to explain it to you. You thought you were gaining control of everything I own. Instead, you gained nothing but shame." Daniel's breath came ragged, his shoulders collapsing inward. Lydia shrieked, lunging at me, but the officers pulled her back. "You'll regret this, old woman," She spat, her eyes blazing. I met her glare with steady calm. No. Lydia, you will. They dragged her out the door, her screams echoing into the night. Daniel sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. The sound of his muffled sobs filled the room, mingling with the fading sirens outside. I stood in the middle of my living room, my heart pounding but steady. The war they had waged against me was ending, not with my surrender, but with their ruin.